Shabbat Shalom. We are in Sefirat Haomer, which is the counting of the Omer. It's the time between Passover and Shavuot, Pentecost. And so we are counting up the days to Shavuot. Omer is a unit of measure, and so it's a sheaf, essentially, or a measure of flour. But when harvesting, hand harvesting with a sickle, gather an armful of whatever you're harvesting, barley or wheat. In this case, it would be Passover, would be the barley harvest, leading up to Shavuot would be the wheat harvest. And so it's between the two harvests of barley and wheat. And so you would cut an armful of barley and then wheat and tie it into a bundle, and that is a sheaf. In the days of hand harvesting, all the sheaves would be bundled together into a pile, and 7 sheaves are Shavuot. Shavuot is 7, a unit of measure of sevens, and so Shavuot is 7 sevens. The festival of Shavuot is a count up of 7 Sabbaths. So 7, the Omer is a day, and so 7 Sabbaths is after the 7th Sabbath. The day after the 7th Sabbath is Shavuot. So it is a period of a time of the year that we count up to Shavuot from the festival of first fruits. So Bikurim, we celebrated on Sunday. This past Sunday, in 2025, we are on the 27th of April. And so this past Sunday, we celebrated Habikurim, which was also the 7th day of unleavened bread, which marked the end of the Passover festival, of the whole 8 days that is generally seen as the Passover. And so now we are in the time, we are on the 7th day of the counting of the Omer, and I thought it's something that I do not see often. And in all the books that I have of the festivals, there may be a mention, but there is no specific discussion of the Omer, the counting of the Omer. And so I thought it would be good to look into it a little more and give some questions, possibilities, some connections that I've made, which I believe, have significance. Because nothing in God's word is insignificant, nothing is for nothing. The fact that he specifically mentions that we must count up to Shavuot is significant in itself. And I also believe that the whole history of Israel is significant object lesson for us to understand and follow God's plan, God's purposes, and his design for salvation, for the redemption of the world. And so it's significant that we should dig a little deeper into the significances of Omer, of this counting the days up to Shavuot. So what could it be? Let's look at Leviticus chapter 23, and just a short piece in between Passover and Shavuot. Leviticus chapter 23, I'll go from verse 9. Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to Bnei Yisrael, sons of Israel, and tell them, when you have come into the land which I give to you and reap its harvest, then you are to bring the Omer of the first fruits of the harvest to the Kohen. He is to wave the Omer before Adonai, before Yahuwah, to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the Shabbat, the Kohen is to wave it." That is Habikurim, the Bikurim, that is the first fruits which we celebrated on Sunday. Verse 12. On the day when you wave the Omer, you are to offer a male lamb without blemish, 1 year old, as a burnt offering to Yahuwah. The grain offering with it shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahuwah, for a soothing aroma. Its drink offering with it shall be 1/4 of a gallon of wine. You are not to eat bread, roasted grain, or fresh grain until the same day, until you have brought the offering of your God. It is a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Verse 15. Then you are to count from the morrow after the Shabbat, from the day that you brought the Omer of the wave offering, 7 complete Shabbatot, 7 Sabbaths. From the day that you brought the Omer of the wave offering, 7 complete Shabbatot, until the morrow after the 7th Shabbat, you are to count 50 days, and then present a new grain offering to Yahuwah. You are to bring out of your houses 2 loaves of bread, and then we go on to Shavuot. So that is all that is mentioned, that one verse, just the counting, 7 complete Shabbatot, 7 Sabbaths, and 50 days. So 7 Sabbaths, the day after the 7th Sabbath is the 50th day. So it's a count from first fruits. First fruits is always on a Sunday, because it falls on the day after the first Shabbat after Pesach, after Passover. So Shabbat is a Saturday. Doesn't matter what day Pesach is, whether it's a Thursday or a Friday or a Wednesday. The first Shabbat will be a Saturday. The day after that Shabbat is first fruits, and then you count 7 complete Shabbatot, which will bring you to 49 days. The day after the 7th Shabbat is the 50th day. That is then Shavuot. So that period in between, the counting, is known as Sefirat Haomer, which is counting the Omer. Omer is a sheaf, unit of measure. So, what is this significance? If we look historically, you can do the calculations from the book of Exodus, and you will find that from the time that Israel escaped from Egypt to the time that they stood at the base of Mount Sinai and Moshe went up the mountain and received the commandments of God, it was in the 3rd month. So it is believed that it was on Shavuot that Moshe received the commandments. In the Brit Chadashah, the New Covenant, New Testament, Yeshua was crucified on Pesach, on Passover. He rose on first fruits, Bikurim, and then it was 50 days later that the disciples were all in the upper room, and the Holy Spirit of God was poured out upon them as they met together in the upper room, and 3,000 souls were saved that day. And so it is a significant day both in Judaism and in Christianity. Of course, in God's economy, the two are one. We Christians have been grafted into the root of Israel. And so their history is a very significant and important object lesson for us to learn. So, coming back to the days of Omer and what might be significant about the count itself. So people don't generally really have much to say about it. Certainly in the Christian church, there is no count and no mention of it really. And I imagine few Christians even know about the counting of the Omer. So I just went back to the time of the Exodus. So bearing in mind, always remembering that Israel's history and all the festivals have basis in Israel's history, and specifically, certainly the spring festivals, the first festival, Passover, and Shavuot, have their basis in the Exodus story, the escape from Egypt story. So to find the object lesson, we go back to the Exodus, and then we can discover what spiritual realities exist in the object lesson. And this is the same as we see in Passover, and it's the same that we see in the other festivals, is that they all point to the ultimate plan of salvation of God for the world. Of course, Yeshua, the Messiah, the Anointed One, he is the central figure in that whole plan of salvation because he has made it possible. So he makes it possible, and he also brings it to pass. So going back to Exodus to see what exactly happened during that time. So the time, Pesach, Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits, the three festivals that we've already just finished celebrating, those were all to do with the actual escape. So Israel had to gird up their clothes, put their sandals on, take their staffs in hand, sacrifice the lamb, put the blood on the doorposts, roast the lamb, and eat the lamb with unleavened bread in a hurry. They were supposed to eat it like they were dressed and ready to go, ready to run, which they literally had to do. And so they ate it in a hurry, and then we had the unleavened bread because they took the unleavened bread with them. It was their food for the way, for the escape. And then we come to now they've escaped, and we begin this count as they go. Now at the Exodus, the time of the Exodus, they weren't counting. So God was giving this story, the festivals. He was revealing His will bit by bit. So as they went along, so He was revealing until they came to Sinai, and He gave Moshe the commandments and the blueprint for the tabernacle and essentially the system of governance and the system of religion for Israel. So He establishes in Israel for 400 years. He had grown a nation, numerical nation in physical numbers. And then at the Exodus and at Mount Sinai, then He concretes this people as a nation, not just an ethnic group, but a nation with a system of governance and a religion and traditions. So he establishes this in their history at the time of the Exodus and in the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So this period of the Omer is the 50 days, the 49 days in between the escape and the reception of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So what I discovered, and I'm not going to read it because it's from chapter 14. From chapter 14 to chapter 19 is this period of the Omer. So Exodus chapter 14 to chapter 19, everything in those pages is this period of time, this 50 days between Pesach and Shavuot. Well, not Pesach really, but the escape from Egypt to Shavuot. So I'm just going to give you the highlights of what I've as reading through it, and you must read through it and you must check what I'm saying. What stood out for me are four times really. The fifth one is not mentioned, but I'm taking it as an implication that it may be certainly it's an event, but 4 times particularly where Israel moaned, Israel grumbled. And the 5th time was a war with the Amalekites. And so the Amalekites came out to fight with Israel, and it doesn't say explicitly that Israel grumbled. But if we go back to when they saw Egypt coming after them, they certainly did grumble. So it would stand to reason that they probably also grumbled when the Amalekites came against them. However, be that as it may, it's a fifth event that occurs during this period. In chapter 14, verse 11, is where Egypt has now had a change of heart and is now no longer happy with Israel leaving, and now they're chasing Pharaoh and all his army are chasing after Israel, and they want to attack them and kill them. And Israel, verse 11, they said to Moshe, "Have you taken us away to die in the wilderness because there were no graves in Egypt? Why have you dealt this way with us to bring us out of Egypt? Did we not say to you in Egypt, let us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians? It was better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." So they're grumbling and they're moaning because now they're afraid because the Egyptians are coming after them. And of course then Yahuwah steps in and opens the sea for them to escape. So it's actually quite a understandable position for if you think of yourself now, physical life, and you think of trials and difficulties. God had led them to, if the Nuweiba beach on the Red Sea, the Red Sea is the place where they crossed over, and there's a lot of good evidence and arguments to say that this is the place where they crossed over. If that is the case, if you look at a Google Earth and you just Google Nuweiba Beach, and you look at that, it's huge. It's this massive kind of sand bank that this river. It's not a river. It's a, forget what they call them. In Wadi in the Middle East, they're called wadis. So it's a kloof. In South Africa, we call them kloof or a gorge or a canyon. And so it's a dry riverbed essentially. It's a drainage basin, and it only has water in it when they have flash floods. There's no running water in it. It's dry. So this was a natural highway for Israel to come down, and obviously when there is rain, it washes the sediment out, and it's formed this huge beach, big enough for 5 million people to camp. But it makes it's like a trap, because now you're on this beach, and the mountains behind you, and just this highway, this wadi, the dry riverbed that feeds into this beach. And so if the Egyptian army is coming down the wadi, you're trapped. There's nowhere to go but sea. And so it's quite understandable that they should be afraid and moaning and fearing for their lives. So they moan. So it was war is the one thing. Then the next thing was food. It was water first. Sorry, water in chapter 15, verse 22. They come to the place of the bitter waters at the Sea of Reeds, and so again, God performs a miracle through Moses, and they throw the logs into the water and it becomes sweet. But prior to that, they had moaned about the fact that they were thirsty, they had no water. Now they've come to water, and if you've ever been thirsty, certainly those who've ever experienced the desert would understand that if you come upon water and you're thirsty in a desert, you'd be very excited, only to be really disappointed if you find it bitter. And so again they moaned, and Moshe performs a miracle, and the waters are made sweet. Then thirdly, chapter 16, they moan about they're hungry. And so there are two occasions where they moan about water, one occasion where they moan about being hungry, arguably two occasions where they are in fear of their lives because of war. First the Egyptians, and then in chapter 17, from verse 8, we have the incident where the Amalekites attack them. And so Moses goes up on the hill, and Aaron and Hur go with him. And Joshua goes and fights, and Moses holds his staff up in the air. And when he's holding his staff up in the air, the Israelites win. If he drops his hands, the Israelites lose. And so he has to hold his staff up in the air, and then Aaron and Hur help him keep his hands up so that they can win, and they beat the Amalekites. So there are these 5 events that happen. 2 are to do with water, 2 to do with war, 1 to do with hunger, where the Israelites are moaning. And really what I'm coming to is the testing of God, and the Moses' exhortation to the people to obey God, to listen to God and to obey God. And in this time, what is essentially happening in this time between the escape and the giving of the law, God is testing the people to see if they will obey his law. He's about to give them a law, rules, and he wants to, let me rephrase, he doesn't want to see if they will. God is omniscient. He knows everything. He knows exactly. He tells Moshe, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy is Moses' last instructions to Israel, his last plea, really, to Israel. And in there, we see God revealing to Moshe that Israel will not obey him. They will not listen. And so God knows. And so I believe when it talks about God testing, it's not so much for God to see if you will or won't. It's essentially for us and for those around us to see if we will or won't. For us who proclaim to be, Peter is a prime example of one who said he would follow Yeshua to death. And Yeshua's response was like, really? Paraphrasing horribly. But he was tested, not for Yeshua to see, because he knew that Peter was going to betray him, but for Peter to be confronted with the reality that even his best intentions, what he thought he would do, he could see that he himself was weaker than he thought he was. He himself would not do what he intended to do when the push comes to shove. And so we all are like that. We all have hopes and dreams that we will do the right thing. And we believe that we will do the right thing until we are really pushed and pressed again with our backs against the wall. Then what do we do? And so it reveals to us our weakness, and I believe that's possibly what the Apostle Paul might have been dealing with when he said he has this thorn in the flesh, and 3 times he has prayed to God to remove it, and he doesn't, because it's that thorn that keeps him humble. And so when we are confronted with our own weakness and failings, it keeps us humble. And it's a problem with so many religious leaders who have fallen from grace because they lost their humility. They started to think big of themselves. Okay, so we see in chapter 15, verse 26, it says, there he made a statute and ordinance for them. This was now after the war with the Amalekites. He made a statute and ordinance for them, and there he tested them. Verse 26, he said, if you diligently listen to the voice of Yahuwah your God, do what is right in his eyes, pay attention to his mitzvot, that's commandments, and keep all his decrees, I will put none of the diseases on you which I put on the Egyptians, for I am Yahuwah who heals you. So we see Israel's grumbling and moaning. We see their attack and their defeat of the Amalekites. And then God says to them, this is what you are to do. You are to listen to my voice. You are to do my commands. If you do them, things will go well with you. I believe again that that's not a reward necessarily, and things going badly with you if you don't is not necessarily a punishment. It's because it's the way God has made things, and therefore He has given us the instructions. It's like I always use the analogy of a motor car with a user manual, the workshop manual. So anyone who's worked on an engine of any kind will know how wonderful it is when you have the manual, because then you're not feeling around in the dark. You actually have instructions to tell you how this thing works and what to take off first before you can take something else off to get to something else. And it's so much easier and more enjoyable when you have the instructions. And so God has made us and this world in a certain way, and He's given us instructions. And if we do those things, it will all work the way it's meant to work. And so things will go well with us. If we don't, if we reject what He has said, things are going to go badly with us. Not necessarily because He's punishing us, but because He's designed us to function and to be and to live and to exist a specific way. One example would be the eating of pork. Everyone's going to go, ah! Because, anyway, the whole discussion of pork is a long discussion, which I'm happy to get into another day, except to say for this purpose that the enzymes that are required to break pork down, to digest pork, are known as the death enzymes, because they're only supposed to be released by the body when you die to break your own body down, to decompose your body. And so when you eat pork, your body has to secrete these enzymes in order to digest it. That's why many people get uncomfortable stomachs after they've eaten pork. So this is just one example of the way God made things. And if we do what He says, we work better. Our bodies, physiologically, we just function better. And so our lives are better. When we don't, our lives are worse. And so much of the disease and the illness and the death in the world is because we reject what God has said. We do all sorts of things that fill our bodies with poisons and all sorts. And we live worse than we were designed to live. And when we start to live according to His word, eat the things that we're meant to eat and avoid the things that we should avoid. We were reading the thing just this morning about in the medical fraternity, a doctor who they found that in childbirth, so many percentage of mothers were dying. It was mothers, eh? I think it was mothers after childbirth were dying, and because the doctors were checking on the mother and then going off to the next mother without washing their hands in between. So one doctor, in his wisdom, decided to make it a rule in his hospital that doctors wash their hands between patients. And the death rate went down to something like 2%. And this is just another example of when we do, it was God who commanded in His commands that if you touch a dead body, you are unclean. And you must wash. You must wash your hands, you must wash your body. You're unclean for the day, and then at evening you then can be clean again. And so it's, I have to tell you the story. It's another one of the reasons of the pogroms. So anti-Jew, the anti-Semitism in the pogroms in, I forget now which one it was. Anyway, one of the pogroms where it was to do with disease, and the Jews weren't getting sick, and so the people blamed the plague on the Jews because they weren't getting sick. Obviously, it must be their fault, and so it sparked a whole pogrom that's kind of attack, not war, but persecution, physical persecution of Jews. So if we do what God has commanded, things go well, things go better. In chapter 16, verse 4, then Yahuwah said to Moshe, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you. The people will go out and gather a day's portion every day, so that I can test them to find out whether they will walk according to my Torah or not. And so even before the law is given on Mount Sinai, Yahuwah is testing how they will respond to his instructions, how they will, and again, he knows from the Garden of Eden. He told Adam and Eve, don't eat this fruit. What do? They eat the fruit. So he knows, but he's showing Moshe and he's showing Israel that they're not going to do what he said. So this time, chapter 18, verse 4, verse 5, now if you listen closely to my voice and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among all people. So this time, what I'm seeing in the time of the Omer is the time of God testing the people to see if they will obey his commands, if they will keep to his instructions. Torah is not law. Torah is instructions. Like that manual, we have instructions. And so it's if you read Psalm 119, the attitude of those who love God is that they love his instructions. As I said, how the joy of having instructions when you don't know what to do, having a book or someone who does know is the greatest joy, because then you can get it right. And so this is what I'm seeing as the significance of this period of counting the Omer. What happened in the existence of Israel, in the history of Israel, is that they went through from crossing the time from crossing the water, or before they crossed the water, the time from escaping Egypt. The first one was before they crossed the water. So from the time of the escape to the time, even at Mount Sinai, they're still doing things their own way, with the issue with the golden calf. And so I see this period of the Omer as being a time of testing and a time of disobedience, a time of Israel, which is the example for all of us, showing that they will fall short, that they will rebel against God, that they will do their own thing rather than do what he says, that they will fear rather than trust. And so even after the incredible miracles in Egypt, when they were up against the water, they feared, knowing what God had already done, the miracles he had already done. Then the miracle of miracles, they walk through a sea on dry land, and then watch as the seas come together and wipe out the whole Egyptian army. Then, so it wasn't the what was God short-sighted? Did he forget that they would need water? Did he forget that 5 million people would need food in the desert? So it wasn't the fact that they moaned revealed their lack of trust. The fact that they were full of anxiety and they'd rather go back to Egypt and die in Egypt and be slaves revealed their lack of trust, their lack of faith. And so it's almost like God held back to wait for their response, for them to show that they either trusted him and they were going to sit and wait and say, okay, God's going to make the plan here because we don't know what's going on, or they did what they did. and said, and wanted to riot. And a number of times Moses was afraid for his own life because they were going to riot. So we come to the book of Deuteronomy, and I just stopped because there's too much. But all the way through, I was highlighting in green all the times where God says through Moshe that Israel must do what he commands. And it's over and over and over where this Deuteronomy, as I said, is Moshe's final instructions to Israel. He is not going to join them in the promised land. He has been judged with the rest of his generation that because of their grumbling and because of their rebellion against God, that generation was not going to see the promised land, and so that's why they meandered through the wilderness for 40 years. It wasn't a 40-year journey from Egypt to Canaan, but he kept them out in the wilderness to purge Israel of that generation that rebelled against him. Moses, he had a moment of weakness when he struck the rock twice. God said to him, he must strike the rock and speak to the rock, and the water will come out. And he struck the rock twice. And in his anger, almost kind of made like it was him bringing water to Israel. So he was judged together with his generation, so he wasn't going in. So this was his final letter before he would go up the mountain and die, and then Joshua would take Israel into Canaan, cross the Jordan and take them into Canaan, and this was his final words to them. And again, I just did what I did with Exodus. I just did a skim through the whole book of Deuteronomy, and what stands out for me the most, all the green that I'm seeing, is where God, through Moshe, or Moshe himself, is exhorting the people to obey God's commands, to obey God. If you love God, obey God. His covenant which he commanded you, the 10 words, so that you might do them. To do, you must keep and do them over and over. Keep his statutes and his mitzvot. Mitzvot is commandment. If only there was such a heart in them to fear and keep my mitzvot always. So that's almost like a despairing, well, there isn't. It's like, if only there were, implies that there isn't. There isn't a heart to keep his mitzvot always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. If you keep the precepts and principles of God, it will go well with you forever. And they will do them in the land. Take care to do as Yahuwah your God has commanded you. You are to walk in the ways that Yahuwah your God has commanded you. To do, to keep the statutes, all his statutes. To take care to do this. Diligently keep the mitzvot of God. And he goes on, and it's time and again, there's this exhortation. Therefore, you are to keep the commandments. You are to take care to do the whole mitzvah that I'm commanding you today. So you are to keep the mitzvah of God, and over and over and over. Chapter 10, verse 12. So now, O Yisrael, what does Yahuwah your God require of you but to fear Yahuwah your God, to walk in his ways, and love him, and to serve Yahuwah your God with all your heart and with all your soul, to keep the mitzvot of Yahuwah and his statutes that I am commanding you today for your own good. Behold, to Yahuwah your God belong the heavens and the highest heavens, and the earth and all that is in it. So when you keep the mitzvah, when you keep God's commands, it is for your own good. It is for our own good. I'm going to skip to whatever I command you, you must take care to do. I'm going to skip all the way to chapter 28, 26. chapter 26. This day Yahuwah your God is commanding you, verse 16. This day Yahuwah your God is commanding you to do these statutes and ordinances, so that you take care to do them with all your heart and with all your soul. Today you have affirmed Yahuwah as your God, that you will walk in his ways, keep his statutes, mitzvot, and ordinances, and listen to his voice. Now today has affirmed you as his treasured people, and he has promised you that you are to keep all his mitzvot, that he will set you above all the nations that he has made, for praise, fame, and honor, and that you are to be holy people to Yahuwah your God, as he has promised. If you love the God of the Bible, you are grafted into that root. These things apply to us as much as Israel, because we are grafted into Israel. These things have been ordained forever. I'm coming to the New Testament. Cursed is the one who does not uphold the words of this Torah. That's chapter 27, verse 26. And then more and more and more and more and more, in order that all the words of this Torah, in order to do all the words of this Torah. And then chapter 30, verse 11. Chapter 30, verse 11. It says, for this mitzvah that I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you. Everyone who says it's impossible to keep the law of God, it's impossible to be holy as Yeshua was holy. It's impossible to be perfect as Yeshua was perfect and never ever transgress the law. Why? Because we already have. We have a history. We were born and raised and we sinned. We were born in the image of Adam, so we were already on a back foot. We already choose sin as our first inclination. Then we sin as we live, until we come to a point of understanding that we are sinners doomed to destruction, and that we deserve that destruction, and that we need a Savior, that we cannot save ourselves. Then we come to that point of understanding that we need the Savior, and we come to understand that the Messiah is our Savior, that God saves through his Messiah. Then we can be saved. We can turn, that we know that sin essentially is a rebellion against our Creator, and that through the Savior, through the Messiah, we can be reconciled to our Creator. That is salvation, the reconciliation to God. Then we can, and then the mitzvah, the commands of God, are not too difficult for you. So we can keep the commandments of God. It's not too difficult. Nor is it far off. It is not in the heavens, that you should say, who will go up to us for the heavens, up to us to the heavens, and get it for us, and have us hear it, so that we may do it. Nor is it across the sea, that you should say, who will cross over for us to the other side of the sea, and get it for us, and have us hear it, so we may do it. No, the word is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to do it. See, I have set before you life and good health, death and evil. What am I commanding you today? What I am commanding you today is to love Yahuwah your God, to walk in his ways and keep his mitzvot, statutes, and ordinances. Then you will live and multiply, and Yahuwah your God will bless you in the land that you are going in to possess. But in your heart, if your heart turns away and you do not listen, but are drawn away and bow down to other gods and worship them, I tell you today that you will certainly perish. You will not prolong your days in the land when you are about where you are about to cross over the Yarden to go in and to possess. I call the heavens and the earth to witness about you today that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore, choose life, so that you and your descendants may live, by loving Yahuwah your God, listening to his voice and clinging to him. For he is your life and the length of your days, that you may dwell in the land that Yahuwah swore to your fathers, to Avram, to Yitzhak, and to Yaakov, to give them. If you love Yahuwah, you do his word, you do his will. Chapter 32, verse 46. He said to them, "Put in your hearts all the words that I call as witness against you today, that you may command your children to keep and do all the words of this Torah, for it is not an empty thing for you, because it is your life." To keep the words of Torah is your life. In this context, speaking directly to Israel, but in our context, as being grafted into the root, it still applies. Not because we are saved by keeping the Torah, but because keeping the Torah is the evidence that we are saved. Because if you love Yahuwah, if you love God, that is the outpour, that is the response, the reaction, the consequence. Yeshua said, "If you love me, you will keep my commands." Jeremiah 31, this is what the writer to the Hebrew quotes in Hebrews chapter 8. So I'm going to read it from Jeremiah because it's still pre-Pentecost, pre-Shavuot, after Yeshua's resurrection. Jeremiah 31 from verse 30. So many will say, well, let me read it. "Behold, the days are coming," it is a declaration of Yahuwah, "when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. For they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. It is a declaration of Yahuwah. But this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel, for after those days it is a declaration of Yahuwah. I will put my Torah within them. Yes, I will write it on their heart. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will each teach his neighbor or each his brother, saying, 'Know Yahuwah,' for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. It is a declaration of Yahuwah." So many will take that and they will say, well, you see, we are no longer under the law, and the law is now it's on our heart and in our minds, on our heart, and so we don't have to worry about the Old Testament. It's a complete, it's kind of, I wanted to say brainless, but it's illogical, because what he's saying is the Torah, God's instructions, will be written on our hearts, in our minds. In other words, it's those instructions. It's not something, it doesn't mean that those are now gone away. It means that they are now appropriated into my heart. Therefore, it should be what I've said just prior to this, is it's the natural outpouring of someone who is saved, someone who does love the Creator God, this God of the scriptures, of the Holy Bible. If you love this God, then keeping the Torah, following his instructions, doing the things that please him, is a natural outpouring, or just the desire. If you haven't been taught, if you haven't been paying attention, then just the desire to do what pleases him should be evident in your life. As I said, Yeshua said, "Those who love me keep my commands." So having the Torah on your heart is it's the Spirit of God which enlivens you to do the things of God, the things that please God, the things that God has commanded, and those are the things that are contained in the scriptures. And so I've always said, and I continue to say, that the Spirit works hand in hand with the scriptures. The Spirit does not work independently of the scriptures. And this, I believe, is where the link and between first fruits, Habikurim, and Shavuot, linked together by this counting of the Omer, this 7 Shabbatot, it links them together as not as one event. They are celebrated as distinct events, but they are linked together. They work together. They are from the time of the escape, from the time that we are redeemed from bondage, slavery, from Egypt originally, which was a picture of sin. So now we understand that our Egypt is our previous lives, where we were subject and in bondage to sin. So we are delivered and set free from that. And then we look forward to the outpouring of the Spirit in us, which enlivens in us a desire for the Word. And so we read the Word, and our minds are then educated into the things of God. And so the Word is in our heart and in our mind, in the sense that the Spirit moves our hearts to desire the Word, which we then absorb through the processes of reading. And that is why, for me, one of the evidences of a true believer are those who are hungry for the Word of God, those who read this book, those who are like the Bereans, and when they hear someone preach something, will go to the scriptures themselves, read it to see if these things be so. And so we count the Omer as Gentiles in obedience to what God has commanded, in the knowledge and understanding that these things are significant in the kingdom, that these things are good for us. And as my wife pointed out the other day, there is a rhythm in the calendar of God. And so if we follow the things of God, if we do the things of God, there is a rhythm that is in perfect harmony with the natural order, with life out there, with the agricultural seasons, the history of Israel, which all fell around the agricultural seasons, with the movement of the celestial bodies, the sun, moon, and stars. And so everything that God has designed is in perfect harmony. And so when we begin to move in step with God's design, we fall into that harmony and we pick up that rhythm, and it becomes a beautiful symphony of life. And so I pray that you will experience that life. Shabbat Shalom. And I don't think there's a greeting for the Omer, but enjoy the counting until the feast of Shavuot. Shabbat Shalom.